Hey everybody! It's time to talk about another staple from my childhood that I regard fondly and everyone else seems to think is bad. Well, spoiler alert, it is! The Croc franchise, developed by Argonaut Software and published by Fox Interactive, originated in 1997 with Croc, Legend of the Gobbos, released first for the PlayStation and a year later for the Sega Saturn and PC. Released only a year after Super Mario 64, Croc was a forerunner into the world of 3D platforming, and spawned 2 main games as well as 5 smaller titles, all of which I'm happy to address in this video. So strap in folks, we're starting from the top. Gameplay in Legend of the Gobbos, Gobbos? I'm gonna go with Gobbos, is level-based, the goal being to get through to the gong at the end, fighting the evil Dantinis and rescuing as many Gobbos as you can along the way. You see, the Gobbos have been kidnapped by the biggest Dantini of all, Baron Dante. Are the Dantinis named after him, or is he named for his species? Well, either way, with the Gobbos who raised Croc from a cute baby dial to 3 Gobbo high wrecking ball suddenly being kidnapped, Croc has to cross island to island to face off against Dante himself. Croc 1 is a pretty short game, only 4 islands to the end, with 8 stages and 2 bosses each. Each level takes anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the complexity, which slowly ramps up the further on in the game you get. So, let's see, some quick math here. 40 stages, including bosses, times 5 is 200 minutes, times 10 is 400 minutes, each divided by 60, about 3 to 6 hours of game time in theory. But it's not going to take that long. It's going to take much, much longer. This game is extremely cute. The colors are bright, the enemies are laughable to look at, and Croc makes some adorable noises.
Kapow! Kaboof! Splat! Kaboof!
But this game is hard. This game is frustratingly hard, and it's hard in some very stupid ways. Let's start with where most of the difficulty comes from, the controls. Croc controls like a shopping cart. Moving forward is fine, but if you want to turn, you're going to be lifting up those back wheels. The left and right buttons don't move, they only serve to pivot Croc in place, and even while you're running forward, you're better off fully stopping to turn, because Croc's turning radius is wide. Even jumping is a more efficient way to adjust your angle. You might see how this could cause some problems in a platformer. It's not terrible to get used to, but it does make Croc show his age. Analog sticks for the PlayStation came around late in Croc's dev cycle, and there sure as heck aren't any analog sticks for PC or the Saturn, so clunkiness comes with the territory. Not that this makes it excusable. Even reviews at the time criticized the controls as well as the camera, but that's just a little context for y'all. That said, the clunky slowness of the controls didn't stop Argonaut from including crumbling platforms, timed levels, and something particularly mean that I'll get to in a minute. But, going beyond movement, Croc has a few other buttons to work with. Jump, obviously, which can then lead into a stomp, which both deals with boxes as well as enemies, but stops all momentum, and a tailspin, which is generally the more effective way to deal with troublesome Dantinis. Not all gameplay is on solid ground, however. Croc's repertoire also includes climbing, monkey bars, and even swimming, all of which helps give the game a little bit of depth and flourish. You've got to animate all that stuff, you know. That ain't cheap. Legend of the Gobbos is actually a pretty varied game. Each island has its own theme, going from your basic green starter levels, to ice, desert, and lastly the complicated castle levels. Each level also comes with its own brand of Dantini, most of which are at one extreme on the scale of stupid easy to ridiculous auto-aim garbage, but hey, they do look cute. Speaking of enemies, and of damage, Croc's been taking lessons from Sonic the Hedgehog. When an enemy hits you, you drop all the gems you were carrying, with the opportunity to pick them back up. If you're hit when you don't have any gems, you flop over sadly and lose a life. Losing a life doesn't reset your progress in the level, however, instead putting you at the last door you went through, as well as letting you keep any keys, Gobbos, and colored gems you were carrying when you died. This is pretty forgiving, and it's probably this game's saving grace in terms of difficulty. It's only when you lose all your lives that you're kicked out of the level, set back with 3 lives to try again. Now, 3 lives isn't much when you consider that most of your deaths are going to be to crap controls, cheap shots, and bottomless pits, but hey, could be worse. You're also allowed to save and load your game from the level select screen to preserve your life count and avoid a punishing game over, as well as enter a password to take you to any level you want, you know, in case your friends had it written down or something, or tattooed. Oh, hold on, how much is a tattoo? Heck yes. Anyway, with all these things at your disposal, getting from the start to the end of each level isn't that hard. If you don't care about secret bonus stages or saving Gobbos, most of these levels are a breeze, and the bosses are all pretty similar. Simple patterns that mostly involve running circles around them, and 3 hits to kill. The boss designs are pretty charming too, so that's a plus. But boy, if you do want to save the Gobbos, boy howdy. So, there are 6 Gobbos in each level, usually 5 in the level itself, hidden behind doors and locked with keys and gated by complicated platforming, and then 1 at the very end, behind a special door. To unlock this special door, you have to find 5 colored gems. Again, hidden behind doors, at the end of tricky platforming segments, or even masquerading as regular gems. This encourages exploration of the levels and usually isn't so bad. As long as you make sure you're thorough, you're not likely to miss any except on 1 or 2 levels in the whole game. But once you're through the gem locked door, welcome to hell. This is where Croc locks all its really difficult content, probably assuming that if you got all the gems, you're ready for whatever it wants to throw at you. This is where the most complicated platforming is, where the timed levels are, and where the most awful, hideous, who on earth thought this was okay minigames are. Fortunately, in the case of the timed and platforming levels, you can usually try again as many times as you have lives. Just hop into a pit and run through it again until you grab your Gobbo and leave successfully with the gong. Sometimes you can even turn around and leave through the gem door again if they're feeling particularly kind. You can never do this with the minigames. There are 2 varieties of these, with the top prize always being a Gobbo. There's Whack-A-Mole, where 3 creatures pop out at a gradually increasing speed and you have to press the buttons to explode them before they get away. And then there's the catching game, where you press the buttons to make the pot move back and forth, gathering all the gems without missing any to get the Gobbo at the end. You might be able to tell where the problem is with these minigames. These are very, extremely, mercilessly tight in timing, and your controls are so pathetically, tragically clumsy. You must jump and then press a direction button. If you press the directional button first, it's over. You're misaligned now, and you're done for. Don't jump too early or too late either, because if you don't know where you're going, you're done for. And if you can't get there, you're done for. Let me say it again. If you fail either of these minigames, you have to restart the level to try them again. If they were behind a gem-locked door, and thankfully some of them aren't, that means you have to collect all the gems again too. And you might think, but Tiri, I am smarter than the game. I will go straight for the minigame, get the Gobbo, and get out. And I will say, oh, you sweet summer child. You see, while the game keeps track of how many Gobbos you got in a level, it doesn't keep track of which ones. In order to get that sweet 6 Gobbo score, you have to collect all of them in one run. Oh yeah, and one of the levels on the final island has you do both of these minigames in one level. And then they throw in a shell game too, just to make sure every attempt has that one extra chance to be foiled. Now, I want to remind everybody, I like this game. I think it's charming, varied, and even nice to look at. But if I were playing it for fun, I wouldn't go for 100%. I would give up. And why would you want to 100% it anyway? Well, for the true ending, of course. Once you beat a boss, if you've rescued all the Gobbos in the previous 3 stages, you unlock a secret level, which is usually a longer than normal stage with some unique level design, a ton of gems to rack up for an extra life at 100, and a jigsaw piece at the end. Once you've collected all the jigsaw pieces, put them in your trusty backpack, and let your bird companion come by and... Hey, hold on a second. Wait, whoops, that game came after this one. Silly me. Once you've beaten the final boss and put together the world's smallest jigsaw puzzle, another island opens up. Beat that island, and you've done it. You've well and truly beat the game and can move on to the sequel, knowing that you've suffered and prevailed, becoming a king among Gobbos. But seriously, why would you? Maniac. Croc 2 time, everybody! This is the game I actually grew up with, and boy am I glad, because this is a much nicer game. And yes, that is my biased opinion. Croc 2 released in 1999, a year after games like Spyro and Gex Enter the Gecko, games that Croc seems to draw comparisons to pretty often, and admittedly for good reasons. Actually, let me put up a timeline real quick, because while Croc and Gex are about equally matched as small-time, forgotten 90s titles, almost everyone's heard of Spyro, so I want to settle this right now. Croc came first, so if we're gonna call my boy derivative, let's at least get it right. He's obviously Yoshi. Argonaut actually approached Nintendo about making a game for them, where you play as Yoshi, with the working title Yoshi's Racing, supposed to be a blend of Super Mario World and SNES Mario Kart, but in 3D. And they did this before Super Mario 64. In fact, to listen to Argonaut's founder tell it, the concept that they pitched was essentially the world's first 3D platformer, and influenced not only the development, but the creation of Super Mario 64. Whether you trust that or not, though, that's up to you. I mean, heck, I'd take credit for Super Mario 64 too if I had the chance. Either way though, Nintendo turned down this idea, and Argonaut took their ball and headed across the street to Sony's house. That said, while Croc saw life in 3D before Gex made the jump, they're both bipedal lizards with a tail attack, making it difficult to dispute some influences there. And if we're going to talk about Spyro, well, that's where it leads into Croc 2 here. While Legend of the Gobbos was level-based, Croc 2 operates out of hub worlds, each with their own theme similar to the first game. And, of course, this is all comparable to how Spyro organizes its levels. Personally, I'd be inclined to believe the situation was the same with how it was with Croc 1 and Super Mario 64. Development on Croc 2 started before Spyro's, but a smaller team meant a longer dev time. But I don't have any proof to back up this claim, so take it as you will. In terms of mechanics, Croc 2 is pretty similar to the first game, with a few key tweaks. Notably, Croc 2 has 2 control types. Type 2 is essentially the same as how the first game played, with the same old tank controls. Left and right only pivot, forward and backward move in those directions. However, Type 1 is your analog stick option, brand new for this installment. Press left and Croc will turn and head off in that direction. Press back and Croc will pull a 180 and head toward the camera, completely removing his backward step animation. Type 1 is still pretty awkward for keyboard, however, mostly because of how slow Croc is to turn around, and the movement of the camera means that you'll have to let go of that key or he'll just keep spinning. But even with Type 2, Croc controls better overall in this generation, though that might also be because the level design seems more conscious of the control limitations, giving Croc more wide open spaces to wobble around in. Croc also has a new move in his repertoire, that being a bounce that he can get off of his stomp, supplementing his momentum instead of killing it, and enabling more interesting platforming maneuvers. I also want to give a special shout out to my favorite control addition, which is this absolutely pointless move you can pull off by pressing both sidestep buttons at once. There's no reason to use this, not even slightly, but boy it looks cool. Heck yeah! The basic story of the game is that Croc receives a letter from his long-lost parents, and as part of his quest to find them, he must foil Baron Dante's evil plans yet again, saving 4 different worlds of Gobbos, who, by the way, look very different from Croc 1, being rendered in 3D now as opposed to fakey 2D. How much of this was a purposeful design change and how much was a technical limitation, the world may never know, but their cute lion tails are gone now, for better or for worse. The Dantinis have gotten an overhaul too. They've gotten bigger, fatter, and easier to deal with better, longer tells for when they're going to shoot, and a little worse aim. They also take much longer to respawn, if they ever do, which is a godsend. Unfortunately, there's also less enemy variety, with only a few kinds of Dantinis and none of those weird worms. Not that I'm fussed. There is, however, more level variety, albeit in different ways. Underwater sections are gone, though Croc can still swim above water. Minecart sections make an appearance, executed only slightly better than other games, and Croc's Racing comes into play in 2 levels, one of which is almost fun. Various levels also implement their own lesser gimmicks, some of which hit the mark and some of which fall flat, but it does make every level feel unique and distinguishable from the rest, something that Croc 1 didn't always succeed in. Bosses too are far more interesting, most designed larger than Croc, with the end result of being more threatening looking. They also have more creative ways to defeat them that aren't just running in a circle until they tire themselves out. Something interesting that Croc 2 does that the previous game didn't, is it uses gems as currency, to be used in the this is Swap Meet Pete, the shopkeeper, and peddler of various wares that you'll need to 100% the game. Basically, every level has 100 gems in it, but instead of being used like Sonic's rings, they're solely used to take out of the level and exchange for goods. Croc's health system is instead more traditional, our boy being able to obtain up to 9 hearts, which function as both health and lives, in the sense that being hit will remove one without killing you, but falling into a pit or lava will both remove one and reset you to the last checkpoint. This could be pretty frustrating when you would otherwise make it across a pit if the lava just drained your health a la Super Mario 64, but it would also put you into a fail state in some cases, so I guess I can't blame them. As for the wares being peddled, heart pots, which add a heart to your maximum, are sold for a steep price, but the real sellers are the Nabisco brand gummy savers, with all the delicious fruit flavor of classic Nabisco lifesavers. Buy Nabisco today! Huh? What were we talking about? Oh yeah, gummy savers. These are consumable items, used in specific spots inside levels, usually to acquire a colored gem. There are 3 types: jump, high jump, and long jump, sold for varying prices and color-coded to match where you're supposed to use them. Swap Meet Pete also sells these slightly disturbing clockwork Gobbos, to be used on clockwork pads in various levels, also usually for a colored gem. You might have noticed that this means some levels can't be fully completed without paying Swap Meet Pete for the right items, and you won't know what items specifically until you've already played the level once. You might also notice that you're not guaranteed to succeed in using a clockwork Gobbo. Colored gems themselves also function a bit differently. Instead of opening a door, collecting all the colored gems in a level spawns the entrance to a golden Gobbo trophy stage, allowing you to play a short but challenging room for the chance to win a golden Gobbo trophy. Collect all the trophies in a hub world, and you'll gain access to a whole nother level, with the classic jigsaw piece waiting at the end. Now, I did say there's a chance to win the golden Gobbo trophy, and I say that because again, Croc not only drops the ball on the difficulty curve, but absolutely spikes that sucker. Unlike the old gem lock doors, which always checkpointed you at the door and usually let you try again unless a minigame was involved, you have one shot at the trophy. If you fall in a pit, that's it. You get kicked back to the stage, trophy entrance gone, and if you want to try again, you have to exit and re-enter the stage, collecting all the colored gems again. This isn't difficult, it's just slow and tedious, making the game needlessly frustrating, especially considering that Croc 2's levels are much longer than Croc 1's, to make up for there being less of them. Add this to the fact that every failure usually means spending more money on gummy savers, I think I'd rather just pop open a real bag of gummy savers and mope. Gummy savers. Just like in Legend of the Gobbos, if you don't collect all the jigsaw pieces, you won't be getting the true ending. But Croc 2 makes this a little bit more obvious, just to really drive home the fact that you're not really done. Of course, if you want to see the true ending, you'll have to play the game yourself. Because my game bugged and won't let me go through the last golden door. Still, while I'm ragging on this game a fair amount, I do still really enjoy it. It plays well, a little clunky by today's standards, but nowhere near the level of Croc 1, and there are no minigames in sight. Plus, it's just as charming and fun, with updated graphics and colors. It also runs on systems past Windows 98, which is a plus. Honestly, I think it's a crime the series never got the last game in its intended trilogy. Low sales of Croc 2 and Argonaut's closure in 2004 responsible for leaving possibly my favorite mascot character lingering in obscurity. That's not to say Croc 2 was the last game, of course. The Game Boy Color saw an adaptation of Croc 1 in the year 2000, with a charming Game Boy rendition of the music and a side-scrolling platformer style that sort of undermines the whole point of the franchise. But hey, you didn't expect the Game Boy Color to do 3D, did you? Now, I've been highlighting Croc's faults this whole video, but this game is actually atrocious. It's hard to describe exactly what's going on here, but it's only fair to say that this game controls like a bootleg cart that is not only bad to begin with, but has probably been left in the sun too long and fried some circuits. Croc moves like he's stuck to the ground with magnets, always moving exactly one full croc-footed step when you press the directional button, and his jumps are as stiff as they look, not even mentioning this nauseating camera movement and the gross input lag. As for the hitboxes, jumping on an enemy to kill them seems to be technically possible, but heck if I can get it to work without getting myself hurt in the process. Hitting them with your tail the sensible way is also nigh impossible, not only because you have to be basically in hurt range to even hit them, but because Croc seems to fling himself forward at random when you hit the tailspin button. You know, except when he doesn't. The tailspin button also serves as a dash if you hold it down, which seems like it would be fun if it weren't prone to throwing you in a pit. This game does do one thing right though. When Croc takes a hit, he loses 3 gems, and he can keep taking hits as long as he has gems to lose. 3 gems is pretty small compared to the amount you'll collect in a level, so theoretically, as long as you're not falling into any pits, you can just rush past sections you don't like if you have enough gems for it. This fact, combined with the extremely rigid and predictable controls that also happen to be unsuited to human hands, means that I would be very interested in seeing a tool-assisted speedrun for this game. Seeing this game played well would be one heck of a feat, but I think only a computer could possibly do it. Actually, you know what? I challenge anyone to play this game themselves. Go ahead. Make my day. Then, when you're done, you can pick up Croc 2, also for the Game Boy Color, and released in 2001. Developed by Natsume Company, the Japanese Natsume, the one that makes all the licensed games and not the Harvest Moon Natsume Inc. If you don't know that story, just go look it up, it's an interesting bit of trivia. Croc 2 for the Game Boy Color actually resembles a game. A top-down, sort of almost 3D rendition of Croc 2, it bears a lot more in common aesthetically with its main game counterpart than the previous Game Boy game did. Sort of like a scaled-down version of Croc 2, with levels completely redesigned for the layout and fewer levels total per hub, it gives off a feel sort of similar to Goof Troop for the SNES. Croc, of course, is better equipped to defend himself, and the hitboxes are more forgiving than the previous Game Boy game entry, even if I can't quite get the hang of them myself. Really, the biggest problem that this game has is just that the levels are sort of a maze. It's hard to execute the big, open level design theory on a 2D plane, especially when you want to have multiple exits per screen. I was finding it pretty hard just to find the level goal. Finding colored gems wasn't even in my mind, even though both Game Boy games have them. Croc 2 for Game Boy adopts the same gems as currency sort of deal, of course, and as with the main game, you can still buy heart pots and well, okay. In 2005, Croc came back under developer Morpheme, that's with an M, with 3 games for cellular phones. You know, like those old Nokia ones. Designed to be played with the squishy cell phone dial pad, 2 of these, Croc, Jungle Rumble, and Croc, Volcanic Panic, are 3D isometric platformers, which control with about twice the input lag of those cell phone ports of Snake. They do, however, have possibly the best rendition of the music. That's a new ringtone. No, but seriously, this is pretty cute, I guess. They're far too confusing and unfun to play for me to say they're good games, but these were early days for mobile gaming. Jungle Rumble's colors are nice, and while Croc's never spoken so many words in his whole life, it's clear an effort was made to try to be entertaining with the writing. Volcanic Panic doesn't do so well, but that's okay. At least with that one I can get out of the hub. Hello? Help! These games also introduce a new kind of Dantini, in the form of Femtinis. Yeah, I think this is a good enough reason to turn this game off. The last mobile game released for the franchise, and the last Croc game in general, was Croc Mobile Pinball, which I unfortunately can't find a copy of to show off, but I do have this charming image from the old website. Look at that little guy, and his little tiny pinball table. You've ruined my childhood. You monster. Thanks everyone for watching. If you like this video, let me know, and maybe let your friends know too. That sub button gets awfully lonely, you know. But seriously, tell me what games you'd like to see on Nostalgia Trip. I do one of these every month, and I'm always open for suggestions. Thanks again, and happy gaming!